Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Thursday night, Vice President Kamala Harris accepted the presidential nomination from her party.
On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
Her speech at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago capped an astounding month in American politics. With Harris at the top of the ticket, the Democrats hope to re-energize their party. Polls still show a neck-and-neck race, so both parties are pulling hard for each and every vote. And one group that's critical for either party's path to victory is Black voters. For decades, Democrats have counted on this voting bloc. But according to recent polling and Bloomberg reporting, many feel taken for granted by the party, and that's something that the Trump campaign has been trying to leverage. For a while, it seemed to be working. Polling showed Trump chipping away at the Democratic hold on that key constituency. But with Harris as their presidential nominee, Democrats might be mounting a comeback. Today on the show, I'm joined by Bloomberg politics reporters Akayla Gardner and Hadriana Lowenkron, who have been on the campaign trail, tracking how each candidate has tried to appeal to Black communities around the country. And we hear the voices of Black voters about how it's all landing. From Bloomberg's Washington Bureau, this is the Big Take DC podcast. I'm Saleha Mohsin.
Over the last few cycles, really since Obama, Trump, who of course has been on the ticket for the last 3 cycles, has incrementally bitten into Democrats' edge with Black voters.
Akayla Gardner covers politics for Bloomberg News.
It's not a huge swing, but it is a couple percentage points. And I think even those margins still worry Democrats because this is just a bloc that has known to be loyal, that they rely on, particularly in metropolitan cities like Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, like Detroit and Michigan, like Atlanta and Georgia.
Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, all important swing states. A Washington Post analysis found that low turnout among Black voters in places like Michigan and Wisconsin had an impact on 2016. That higher turnout in those key states could have helped Clinton win the Electoral College. That's a big contrast to 2020, when Black voters in Georgia were key to Biden's victory. They made up a third of eligible voters in the state, and 88% of them voted for Biden, making him the first Democrat in decades to flip Georgia. Biden won there by less than 1% of the overall vote.
Such small margins and those percentages do matter.
Historically, the Democratic Party's reliance on Black voters has been a pretty safe bet. Republican presidential candidates usually only attract a small percentage of Black voters. The last time a Republican broke into the double digits was 2004, with George W. Bush winning 11% of the bloc. But that's starting to change. Akayla says Black voters around the country have told her that part of this shift seems to be stemming from disappointment in the Biden presidency. The feeling that he let them down.
That he hadn't really delivered on promises that he ran on in 2020. Those include forgiving student debt. Of course, his plan was overthrown by the Supreme Court last year. That also includes criminal justice reform after we saw those widespread national protests after the death of George Floyd.
We heard from one man in Georgia, Azad Ahmadi, who was once a Democratic voter but now serves as a state delegate in the local Republican Party. He feels the difficult economic reality under Democrats actually started before Biden. After voting blue in 2008, Azad found himself moving towards the Republican Party by the end of Obama's second term.
The moment you actually start looking at policy and the outcomes of the socioeconomic policies of the Democrat Party, that you find, in general, that the outcomes have not been beneficial to our communities.
Economic disillusionment has provided an opening for the Trump campaign. They told Bloomberg back in December that this election, they'd be making their strongest effort yet to target this bloc. Just 8% of Black voters went for Trump in 2016. Accounting for a margin of error and discrepancies among exit polls, Trump may have gained as many as 4 percentage points among Black voters in 2020 to land at 12%. As of December, his campaign was hoping to get a quarter of the vote, 25%. Trump promoted his efforts to secure more funding for historically black colleges, and he leaned into his economic message hard, like in his address at the Republican National Convention last month.
We had no inflation, soaring incomes were going. Nobody can believe it. You can't believe what happened.
If you look at black voters as a whole, I think most of the shift that we're seeing is happening amongst black men. And I think that is specifically because of economic issues.
A lot of the messaging that had been working in terms of Trump and other Republican leaders is this idea that the Democratic Party has taken black voters for granted.
That's Hadriana Lowenkron, who's been covering Trump on the campaign trail.
At the events I've been at, from, my conversations with the audience, they're tired with kind of the state of the economy, for instance. They're worried about crime and policing.
After Trump's criminal indictments, he also tried to connect to Black Americans who felt disillusioned with the criminal justice system. Here he is at the Black Conservative Federation's gala in February.
The black people are so much on my side now because they see what's happening to me happens to them. Does that make sense?
Bloomberg's reporting found that Trump's economic message is resonating.
There are a lot of people who are saying it's not Trump himself. There are things that he says. There are issues with his personality that I'm not fully behind, but I want a difference in terms of my 401k, and I want to be able to afford my groceries.
One of those people is Bishop Everett Spencer, who preaches at a church outside Atlanta. He attended an event called Congress, Cigars, and Cognac back in June, where two of Trump's allies addressed a crowd of mostly black men at an Atlanta cigar lounge. Here's what he told Bloomberg reporter Stephanie Lai at the event.
For the Democrats to say that they're the party of the poor and the disenfranchised, these policies that form these kind of economic situations hurt those communities the worst. And so,
he said he doesn't agree with everything Trump says or does, but on the key issues that matter, Trump is his guy.
We thought his policies were good for America, good for the black community, and helped America flourish. And we would like to get back to that.
The Trump campaign and its surrogates have hosted events like this in different parts of the country, trying to appeal to black voters.
He's been relying on black representatives, such as Representative Byron Donalds of Florida, Senator Tim Scott.
The GOP, we can bring hope to the place where there used to be a desert.
These are people who have been kind of traipsing the country with him when he's going to different rallies, and they're kind of hosting their own events, sometimes at barbershops. I was at the RNC in Milwaukee. They had a specific event for black Republican mayors, and the goal was also, I think, just to serve as a welcoming space for black conservatives, which is a smaller demographic.
And their narrative seemed to stick.
In earlier polling of this election cycle, Trump was attracting more black voters than he had in his previous runs.
In an ABC News Washington Post Ipsos poll released in July, 17% of black voters said they'd vote for Trump in November. Again, that's up from 8% in 2016 and somewhere between 8 and 12% in 2020. Azad Ahmadi again.
I remember a time when it would be confrontational to grab a brother that was sitting outside of a local liquor store and say, I'm a Republican, and I'd like to talk to you about voting for a Republican. And today, I'm telling you, that will turn into an hour-long conversation outside of my local convenience store. There is a very large degree of dissatisfaction with the Biden administration. That's a big deal.
But then, the entire race was turned on its head. Biden dropped out, and Trump's goal to sway black voters came up against a historic development. Kamala Harris becoming the Democratic presidential nominee, the first black woman to ever get a major party presidential nomination. How Harris flipped the script? That's after the break. Back in July, when Joe Biden passed the torch to his vice president, Kamala Harris, some in the Democratic Party worried that she'd be vulnerable to the same criticisms that Biden faced, particularly when it comes to the economy. But even before Harris took over the ticket, Akayla Gardner told me she was trying to make inroads with the black voters who were turning away from Biden.
This was a huge part of her role really on Biden's campaign, was speaking to this constituency. She is, of course, a Black woman. She also attended an HBCU, Howard University. So we saw her consistently speaking to crowds of HBCUs.
Our nation, as it always has, is counting on you to energize, to organize, and to mobilize.
Harris went on what she called an economic opportunity tour around the swing states. She addressed crowds of mostly Black voters talking about the economy in discussions moderated by people like Steve Harvey.
This administration needs to get the word out of what they're actually doing and what they're actually accomplishing so we can stop all this foolishness about what you're doing for Black people.
And when Biden stepped down and Harris announced her intent to seek the Democratic nomination, many Black voters sprung into action.
We saw this Zoom call with an organization called Win with Black Women that had over 40,000 participants who got on, raised more than $1 million, and really spurred many different iterations of copycats.
In the latest NPR PBS News Marist poll from early August, Harris has pulled ahead of Trump, largely thanks to a surge among Black voters. When she first announced her candidacy, she had a 23-point lead with them. Now, she's ahead by 54 points.
They seem to be open to giving her a chance. And something that I'm hearing, frankly, from a lot of folks is her campaign feels a lot like President Barack Obama's in 2008, that the sort of momentum and energy and hopefulness that people have sort of mirrors that, particularly because she is a historic candidate. She is the first Black woman, Asian woman to be a nominee for a major party.
Stephanie Bethea owns a wine shop and tasting room called the Purple Corkscrew outside Atlanta. She was a Democratic delegate for Obama in 2008 and 2012, but she didn't run this year.
Because I thought, oh, it's going to be boring. I didn't realize how down I was and how down everyone was. I didn't know if people were going to vote or not. And so I think with the ballot changed and everyone's excited, I just want to make sure that people keep that energy up.
When Harris took over the ticket, Stephanie said that she hosted a mobilization event at her shop. She was expecting about 17 women to come.
It was just a rah-rah session that we literally put together in 24 hours and got 50 women here, mainly women. At that time, there was no swag, no buttons or anything. And one lady came in, she had literally printed out on a piece of paper, Kamala Harris for president, and safety pinned it to her back.
That energy and excitement is palpable at Harris's rallies and appearances. Akayla, what does it feel like to be at a Harris rally?
It feels a lot different than a Biden rally, I will say that for sure.
Kamala Harris.
He's playing Beyonce songs, pop songs, 80s songs, Diana Ross, Whitney Houston. Her crowds are typically dancing before she comes out and singing.
Even the DNC roll call turned into a Lil Jon rap concert.
Yeah! Ladies and gentlemen, we are here tonight to officially nominate Kamala Harris for president.
On the Trump side, when I'm talking to people, there's a lot of focus on, okay, we want to return to 2016 to 2020. We want to return to how the economy was, et cetera, et cetera. And here it's like, we're doing something new. We're bringing the country forward. This is a new chapter. And I think that also in and of itself kind of sparks a lot of optimism and enthusiasm.
The Harris campaign is hoping to ride that energy until November, but it's still shaping up to be a close race. Trump has remained on the offensive when it comes to knocking the Biden-Harris economic record, and that's still the biggest issue driving many voters. But Trump has also started to acknowledge some of his vulnerabilities. Here he is at Mar-a-Lago, speaking to a group of reporters a few weeks ago.
I seem to be doing very well with Black males. This is according to polls, as you know. It's possible that I won't do as well with Black women.
He's had some gaffes with Black voters since Harris took over the ticket. Notably, there was his appearance at the National Association of Black Journalists convention in Chicago last month. Hadriana, who's a member of NABJ, was in the room.
This happened pretty last minute in terms of when it was officially announced. And so when he finally came out, the audience was apprehensive, and almost immediately he kind of attacks the ABC reporter who was asking the question, listing all of these things he had done.
You have told 4 congresswomen of color who were American citizens to go back to where they came from. You've had dinner with a white supremacist at your Mar-a-Lago resort.
Based on that, why should Black voters kind of trust you?
I don't think I've ever been asked a question in such a horrible manner, a first question.
From there, Hadriana says, the interview went off the rails. Trump went back and forth with the reporters.
Coming from the border are millions and millions of people that happen to be taking black jobs. You had the best.
What exactly is a black job, sir?
A black job is anybody that has a job. That's what it is. Anybody that has a job.
All right.
And he questioned Harris's racial identity.
I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
Previously, he has done these types of events with more conservative voters who already would have bought into his messaging. And so that was a very high-risk opportunity for him, but it did not end up panning out.
In the time since the NABJ event, Trump hasn't changed his tack, despite what he says his advisors have asked.
Please, sir, don't get personal. Talk about policy. Let me ask you about that.
At a rally in North Carolina this week, he asked the crowd whether he should listen to those advisors and stick to policy, or keep up the personal attacks.
Should I get personal? My advisors are fired.
It's a strategy that may rile up his base at a rally, but Akayla says it could be risky when it comes to broadening his appeal.
There was an Axios story about a focus group in Wisconsin, and all of the respondents said they did not like Trump's attacks on Harris's identity. And it's been interesting because the Harris campaign has in some ways responded to it, but not Harris herself or even her running mate, Tim Walz. And I don't think that they feel like they have to. They think that Trump can walk into his own trap in some ways when he does things like this.
In her speech to the DNC Tuesday night, former First Lady Michelle Obama gave a direct response to the comment that Trump made about quote-unquote black jobs. It was an example of what Akayla talked about, times when Trump's language can backfire.
Who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs?
Thanks for listening to the Big Take DC podcast from Bloomberg News. I'm Saleha Mohsin. This episode was produced by Julia Press. It was mixed by Robert Williams. Edited by Aaron Edwards and Laura Davison. It was fact-checked by Alex Sugira. A special thanks to Stephanie Lai for sharing her reporting. Wendy Benjaminson and Elizabeth Ponso provide editorial direction for the show. Naomi Shavin and Kim Gittleson are our senior producers. Nicole Beamsterboer is our executive producer. Sage Bauman is Bloomberg's head of podcasts. Please follow and review the Big Take DC wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps new listeners find the show.